Again, glad to see some first-time code campers. Hope you find this to be a great resource. This event doesn't happen without a lot of sponsors and a lot of volunteers. So if you see these folks in the sponsor hall, be sure to thank them and all that. So today we're going to talk about creating a content strategy for your personal brand. The idea here that we really want to start off with is that you, individually, you are a brand. And part of that brand is kind of derived from the tools and the skills that you kind of bring forward. It also kind of derives from the company that you work for or the clients that you serve. As you're in the marketplace, I really think of it that your brand goes ahead of you, right? Your reputation precedes you. Your brand follows you in terms of the good feelings you leave with customers and former employers and things like that. But what we're going to talk a lot about today is this idea that your brand really serves to kind of draw opportunity to you. And if you've ever taken a high school physics class, Einstein, in his theory of relativity, he talked about a mass in space would create this curvature, and that was what would sort of facilitate orbit and have this gravitational pull, because things, as they're sort of rolling around in space, would kind of get caught in this cone and have an attraction to it. And so I like that imagery because in many ways everything we're going to talk about today is essentially how do we make this mass more massive, right? How do we do things to create more gravity that's going to draw opportunity to us? And so we'll start off, we'll talk a lot about establishing your brand. What are some very practical things to kind of get your brand going? But then also talking about how do we maintain our brand, right? How do we sweep the sidewalks? How do we keep it, where new content is coming out? And believe me, I'm the first to admit this can be the harder part, the maintenance. I've got 3 small children. I work full time. There's only so many hours in the day to sort of invest and participate in some of these activities. But my hope is that the outputs of those and the results of those efforts will begin to compound upon each other. And again, in this kind of metaphor of this gravitational mass, that over time, as you do these things, you'll start to see some good results. So before we get too far into the details, the question sort of, I think it's fair to ask is why do we care about this? And this is a chart I found. This came out this summer. This is one school. This is University of Washington in Seattle. And this blue line here is showing the trend of incoming freshmen who have declared computer science as their area of interest or their major. And you can see the curve that's going on there, that now, granted, UW's a pretty sizable school, probably 50 or 60,000 students, but almost 3,000 incoming freshmen in the computer science department. And these 4 years from now, and the graduates from a year prior and the graduates from a year prior, these are all entering the marketplace and all essentially competing for the same opportunities in that marketplace. And so one of the things that I have observed, when I was going to college, it wasn't quite as cool and hip to be a developer, right? We still sort of had this kind of, technical image that it was hard to overcome. But now there's been so much emphasis on coding. There's been so much emphasis on STEM, teaching kids how to code. Obviously, it's very fashionable to go into technology. And so the risk here, in my opinion, is that while there certainly is ongoing demand for jobs and for skill set, the supply side of the equation is continuing to get populated. And I think there's a real risk of us becoming a little bit complacent in our careers because we continue to get calls from recruiters. We continue to feel like we don't have any trouble finding opportunity. But as more and more, as the supply side of the equation kind of continues to increase, there's a risk of commoditization. And, economically speaking, things become commodities when a product loses its differentiation across the whole of the supply base. And this really kind of comes from an agricultural kind of idea where if farmer A grows a field of wheat and farmer B grows a field of wheat and farmer C grows a field of wheat, how do you really tell where it originated from? Because the product itself is so common across those providers. And so I think, again, as developers, we have this real challenge to not be seen as just another body in a cubicle, right? Why should I hire you when there's 10 others who can do the same job and fill that spot? So that's kind of the motivation for me, and hopefully I can convey to you, of really developing and borrowing some brand marketing kind of ideas and applying them into your career as a way to kind of help differentiate yourself from the masses of developers who are in the marketplace. Does that make sense?
Can you go back one slide?
Yeah.
Okay, across the suppliers.
Yeah. And again, there's a quote that says, I can't tell by the taste of the wheat whether it came from farmer A or from the government or from private company B. So that's kind of the commoditization, right? And so it's a very agricultural, wheat, corn, but a lot of energies too, oil, these sorts of things where the output, the product itself, it's hard to differentiate. And so the brand is really what sort of elevates that up. So we'll talk a little bit about kind of some practical things to kind of get established in your brand, and then we'll spend most of our time talking about activities to kind of help maintain that brand. So in my opinion, probably the easiest first step is to establish yourself an avatar. And your avatar is again kind of the visual representation of your brand. And once you've kind of got that in place, it really should show up everywhere. These are not you, right? These are nobody. And when you're trying to compete in the marketplace, you can't afford to be a nobody. Like, you need to have a strong representation of yourself.
So you mean an actual cartoon avatar, or just pick something like you're in the picture?
Yeah, so typically what I would say is you want a decent headshot of yourself. Now, I would say you don't necessarily need to go hire a photographer and have a professional sort of studio type headshot. This is the one that I use. It was cropped out of a larger image. But it's, once I've picked that and it shows me, and pro tip, use one that's 7 years old because you'll look younger and not as weathered by parenting. But once you've chosen this, then it's everywhere. I think as developers, we operate in a fairly casual industry, right? If you're not in front of customers or in a sales role, you can get away with a pretty casual representation of yourself, and that's fine. What I would say as a word of caution is, if you're going to crop yourself out of a picture, let's not make it a beach party or something that's going to, be less professional. I guess I would leave it at that. Because again, this is what a potential employer, potential customer, this is how they're going to get your first impression of you in many ways. So I recommend about a minimum of 300 pixels square. And once you've established that, then you want to use it everywhere. So every place where you can put that picture on your account, you want to use it. So Stack Overflow is a great example. LinkedIn is a great example. Your Twitter account. You want this thing to propagate as frequently and as visibly as you can. And that alone will go a long way, because again, the picture in your name and the content associated with that will start to have this linkage that when people begin to see, here's this kind of green background, that's probably Derek's picture. I've seen that before. So this is kind of the top 8 targets for your avatar, covering both social media as well as some of the specific technical environments that we participate in, particularly Meetup and MSDN and those kind of places. And one way that you can kind of facilitate that, is people familiar with Gravatar? Have you guys used this before? So Gravatar essentially is a way where it associates an email address with that image. And so this is how a lot of times, like if you ever post a comment on somebody else's blog, and then you go back to see it, like all of a sudden your picture's there. You're like, well, how did that get there? It's because they are following that email address and essentially querying Gravatar to pull that image back down. So, this is a way to kind of have, without you really deliberately going out to every location, Gravatar is a great way to kind of propagate that avatar out. So the avatar, again, is kind of the visual component, and then the more sort of textual component is your biography. And this is essentially sort of like an elevator pitch for you as an individual, right? You will get 3 to 5 sentences, and you're really trying to convey who you are, what you're all about, and how to get in touch with you. And so if you look at, again, this is a little big for the slide, but this is a bio that I've used currently. And the first sentence here is again, kind of the summary statement of who I am and what I'm doing currently. I'm a lead engineer. Here's the company that I work for and what geography that's in. I also have a side project, so I mentioned that as well. As these are the things that I'm doing. This is the kind of work that I'm involved in. The middle part, in my opinion, is really sort of where you toot your own horn, right? This is a bit of self-promotion, but it's tactful to say these are the kinds of things that I've been able to do. These are the types of clients I've worked with. These are the types of results I've been able to achieve. This is how long I've been doing it. This is the specific technology stack that I have expertise in. Because the goal here is to, even at a glance, in 2 sentences, is to establish a little bit of credibility, right? Okay, he's worked with a government agency. We're hiring for that kind of role. There's some credibility there that comes with it. And then the last component is really sort of how to get in touch with you. So for me, I list the URL for my blog. You might put your Twitter handle there. You might put an email address or something like that. But it's a way to sort of, okay, I've read what you're about. Now, how do I get in touch with you? So again, for those of you who just kind of came in, a lot of what we're going to talk about here is how do we do things that are going to create and kind of establish a sense of gravity in the marketplace. So really the way that this functions is in most of what's going to get built upon this kind of mass is content. And I use content as kind of a generic term for anything that you are producing and sort of making available to the public, to the marketplace. Now, one thing that I've done and I generally recommend is sometimes you can't have direct mentorship relationships with people, but you can watch them and you can follow them and you can sort of admire them from afar. So for me, when we talk about content strategy, Scott Hanselman probably does this better than anybody these days. If you're not familiar with who Scott is, he's a program manager in for Microsoft, covering Azure and the .NET tools. He's a very well-known speaker. He's been blogging for about 10 years across a whole wide array of topics. He's also involved and has, I think, at this point, 3 separate podcasts that he's involved in. And so he just really has done a good job of having a comprehensive and kind of cohesive strategy for establishing his own brand. Another person, if you were attended last year, John Sonmez, who did the keynote presentation last year, he's another individual who has done a fantastic job of really establishing a content brand for himself. John Sonmez. So he's a Pluralsight author. He's a prolific blogger. He does a lot of speaking engagements, these sorts of things. And so the reason I kind of point these folks out is that by observation of what they are doing, again, it helps get ideas for things that you can do yourself. So as we get kind of, practically speaking into the creation of content, really the blog is kind of, the leading minimal, what I would say is kind of a minimal engagement. So I like to think of it as if social media is kind of where we shake hands with people, your blog is where you sit down and have a cup of coffee with them. There's a much more conversational aspect to your blog. There's a way to kind of deepen that relationship rather than just kind of the passing element of social media. And so one of I think the primary hesitancies people have is they say, well, I don't have anything to write about. I'm not a very good writer. I don't have anything to say. And so, these are sort of four broad categories of content that can be produced on a blog, really by anybody, right? So the first one is problem solved. So I'm assuming that all of us here are in a day job, writing code, working with clients, solving problems of some form. And inevitably, we're going to bump up against something that we wrestle through, and we come out the other side with a solution for it. Writing about that problem and writing about how you solve that problem and the process you went through of finding that solution, not only is a way for you to record so that later on in life, when you find yourself in that same situation, you say, oh, I've done this before, let me go refer back. But you're also making that contribution to the community so that everybody else who might encounter that problem, even if you feel like this is really obscure and I've never seen this before, chances are somebody else is going to eventually or has encountered that and will appreciate the fact that you've written down an approach that you took to do that, to solve that. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. The second thing are what you think. And so these are kind of opinion pieces, right? If you have an opinion about how a team should be structured, write that down and put it out. If you have an opinion about what source control is better and you have some measuring points for that, write it down and put it out there. And these are a lot of ways where you just sort of work into the habit of writing and the practice of writing. And whether anybody ever reads it or not, this is really more to kind of allow you to get some good disciplines of forming a post through that process. Then more specifically, like how-to type articles, right? How to do a specific task. I like to do these a lot of times when I do this. This is the area where I often will get more into personal projects, right? Where these are sort of work-related or client-related. This is sort of like how I set up my home backup strategy, or how did I, introduce technology to my 7-year-old. These sorts of things. The how-to side, where it's more step-by-step, allows you to kind of explore new topics, share what your experience is along the way. And then finally, reviews would be things like, and again, this isn't necessarily a paid product review necessarily, but if you bought a new iPhone and you like it or you don't like it, like write about what you do or don't like about it and put that up as a review of that product. I think a lot of times we get hung up on the quality of the content, and I would argue that initially it's quantity that's really going to get more of that. Again, if we think about that ball in space, the quantity is what's going to add to the mass necessarily more than the quality is. Go ahead.
I have a question about the quantity. How often would you recommend that you would need to update it in order to keep it? Because I've seen some out there, and if it's never updated, is it really worth having out there?
Right. So just to restate, so the question is like, how frequently should I be posting articles and things like that? We'll talk about this in a moment as far as an actual sort of editorial calendar. My goal is at least once a month, right? That's manageable for me. as, again, a full-time employee with kids and other things coming and going on. Like if I can get one article posted a month, like I'm feeling pretty good about keeping some momentum there. Is that a question? Okay. Go ahead.
So one thing, Derek, I would suggest is I have set up a blog in the past, but usually it is on like Google Blogspot or someone else's domain name. What if you can take this up a notch by setting up your own domain and then creating your blog on that domain?
Yeah. Yeah, so he's saying in the past he's used maybe some of the free tools like a Blogger or some of those. And you're absolutely right. Being able to claim that as your own with your own domain name and a separate hosting relationship, really without diving or getting distracted by what could be a legal question of who owns that content, right? If you're posting it on somebody else's domain, who's the actual owner of that content? By having your own domain, you're really claiming that for yourself. So yeah, I would tend to recommend that approach of registering your own domain name, and there are lots of hosting providers who are very affordable, who can just have a WordPress install or something like that. Even with Azure, you can provision an Azure website using a WordPress template, and then you'll have that deployed straight away, and you can point your own domain to that as well. So thank you for pointing that out. So one kind of trick that I always do, particularly on that kind of problem solution side, is I always try to write the Google post that, the Google search result that I couldn't find, right? So if I have a particular challenge I'm working on and I'm Googling and I'm not finding a breakthrough or I'm not finding any insight, my goal is then to fill that void. So how do I write a post that's going to address those keywords, that's going to present that particular topic in a way so that that it's going to show up in that search result? Go ahead.
Could I recommend that when you do write these blog posts about solving problems, you maybe note the version of things you're using so that readers can actually be helped?
Sure. Yeah. So the comment was, when you're writing it, make sure to kind of talk about what version of product you're on, what build, these sorts of things, because obviously with things changing so rapidly, yesterday's problem is different than today's technology, and there might be a mismatch there.
You don't want people reading and be like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah. I found that, I'm actually doing another session about the NetDuino, and that I found that to be true quite a bit actually, is that, there were pretty rapid releases of the frameworks, and so you might say, well, this works perfect in that scenario as that point in time, but my build is different and it's not working the same way. So it's a good tip.
And the date.
The dates are, yeah. I mean, that's a quick.
That leads you to whether or not you're in the right ballpark.
Yeah.
Because if it's 7 years old and I'm looking for something on Visual Studio,
Absolutely.
I need to move on.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. So making sure that your post either explicitly includes the date or that your blog software is publishing the date will help people. And a lot of times in the search results, it'll show how aged the content is. But that's a great point. I do a fair amount of SharePoint work, and so you'll do a search and you'll looking for the current version of SharePoint 2013, but you'll have a post related to something in a prior version, and I can tell that because it was published in 2007, 2008, 2009, those kinds of things. So in regard to the question about the sort of editorial calendar, it is a good question. How much is too much? I would argue there's probably not too much. But how much do we need to do to kind of keep some momentum building? This is one of these areas where the effort to start a blog is very, very low, right? I could go in probably under 15 minutes and register at a Blogger or one of these and have a space. But how many have you come across where there's 1 or 2 posts on it and then nothing more? And those posts are 4, 5, 6 years old, right? It's the maintenance that really becomes the discipline to it. So again, one thing I've tried to do, and there's actually plugins specifically for like a WordPress that will help you plan this out, is writing up somewhat of an editorial calendar to say, okay, if I'm going to shoot for one a month, let me think of in advance what those topics are going to be, so that I can have the time to do the research if I need to. I can balance those 4 different types of posts across time, so you're not always posting how-to articles. You might kind of mix it up with maybe some product reviews or things like that. So this is just a way to kind of get organized around, what are the topics I want to cover. I always try to, probably on a quarterly basis, get some quiet time, however I need to do that, and really try to brainstorm topics that I want to try to cover. And a lot of that would be reflective on the work I've been doing through the last few months, things I've run into. I want to capture those. And again, that's just part of the discipline of planning out, and what your content plan is going to be. So I use WordPress, and these are a handful of plugins. If you're not familiar with WordPress, it's a very open community. There's lots of third-party contributed plugins for it. So these are ones that I would recommend as kind of a minimum toolkit. AsComment is a service that handles what's called comment spam. So if you turn on comments onto your blog post, you will find all of a sudden your email inbox will be full of like these, there's a new comment on your post, and when you look at it, it'll talk about handbags from Italy. It'll talk about, very clearly robot generated kind of posts. And so AsComment is a service that kind of essentially is a spam filter for WordPress. So that's one that's easy to do. All-in-one SEO pack. So this is a plugin that's focused on adding additional metadata that's going to allow you to optimize for search engines. AuthorBox Reloaded. So at the end of your post, you want to have a little blurb with your headshot and your bio. And so AuthorBox is a plugin that will put that at the bottom of every post. Google Analytics and Google XML sitemaps are ones that will help you see the activity on your blog from an analytics standpoint, and then the XML sitemaps is assisting the indexing process for search engines. Share and Follow is basically a social media sharing plugin. So this is what's going to put all the little buttons with Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and all those little links to have viewers of your article be able to share it on those social networks. If you do any kind of code in your post, then Syntax Highlighter is a way to format that code so that it will render out similar to what you'd see in a Visual Studio. So it's going to have the color coding for different types of terms in the code and things like that. It's actually covers a whole lot of languages and is a very, very cool product. And then the last one there, Total Cache. This is just kind of a caching plugin for WordPress that's going to help your page load times and your image caching and things like that. So these are just 8 that I sort of would say this is your bare minimum kind of plugin set. Once you get looking at these, you'll find there are hundreds and hundreds of plugins that you can choose from. I use another one that shows like the top 10 posts in terms of how many visits they've had. You can do featured articles to have like a rotator on your homepage of featured articles, things like that. It's all plugin based through WordPress. So in terms of the process, what I like to think of it is there's a process of creating the content. Once it's been created, then there's a little bit of a process of promoting that content, and that's typically through social media. And so once you have your post out, then you yourself are tweeting about it, you're posting it to your LinkedIn account. You're starting to try to get some visibility to that content that you just created. And then the third piece is kind of the reminder side of it. Like, there might be a post that I wrote a year ago that still is relevant or still is applicable to someone. And so coming back around and sort of republishing or re-promoting those articles, again, helps meet people at the time where they're at, right? When you wrote it, a certain audience would have seen that and it would have been relevant to them. But now that time has passed, there's a new audience that would find that post relevant. And so you want to have some sort of ongoing reminder processes in to kind of keep those things in front of folks as they go. So does anybody in the room have a blog that's active at the moment? Perfect. One? How frequently are you using it?
Well, I post at my work blog also.
Okay.
So I try to do it, like you said, like every month I try to do something. And but I noticed that I'm probably updating it about once a quarter.
Yeah.
So I get a post over there that's substantial, something that
Yeah.
has some solid content, about once a quarter.
Good.
That's what I'm able to do.
Yeah, and that's great. Yeah, and something's better than nothing a lot of times, you know. And I will say it's easy to kind of beat yourself up about, oh, I didn't get anything out this month, you know, and you know you work that out with yourself. But again, something is better than nothing. You're going to get into that rhythm. I have, you know, one thing I do like about WordPress is you can start an article and save it as a draft, right? And so you can capture that idea and kind of get it started, but then revisit it and things like that. Go ahead.
What do you feel like about a service like Medium? It's sort of newer, kind of branded.
Yeah. So the question was about Medium, which is sort of where you would contribute content to somebody else's blog, essentially, right? And it
Right.
covers a lot of different topics.
You can have your own account, but it's not. It's different than blog in a sense.
Right.
It's like you don't typically, people wouldn't follow your RSS. You wouldn't be found in
Right.
other ways.
Right.
Sort of thing.
I would treat that similar to like a guest posting, right? So, occasionally, if you develop relationships with other bloggers, then you can say, well, let me write a post for your blog, and we'll sort of cross-pollinate a little bit. And so I would kind of treat Medium in the same vein as that, of like, here's another venue. The trick is that when you're creating content, you typically don't want to duplicate it exactly in a lot of different places. And so the hard part then is to say, okay, well, I'm going to write this article just for somebody else, right? How much time do I want to put into that and those sorts of things. But it is, you would gain a great audience for that. And those are the kinds of things where having your avatar and your bio and the link back to your blog would be essential, so that then people can follow back into your environment. So the next kind of step up from blogging then is podcasting. And again, imagery wise, I like to think of it as the podcast kind of lets you take that blog article on a road trip, right? So now you're making that blog article portable because it's an audio file that can be distributed. And so there's a few essential kind of tools that you need to do this. You need a decent quality microphone. Typically, folks will have a particular topic or area of focus for a podcast. So I have started one and have tried really to maintain. So the podcast I did is called Raising Coders, and so the idea was to talk about kids, parenting with iPads, all these sort of unique challenges that I find as a parent of a 7 and 5 and 2-year-old, of like they're growing up in this world that technology is everywhere, and there's this sort of, what are the balances? How do we encourage critical thinking and technology, but not, using the device as a babysitter, for all hours of the day, those sorts of things. So that was kind of a specific topic I tried to sort of carve out and create some particular content around. Recording software, so if you're on a Mac, GarageBand is probably the easiest tool to use. It already has templates for podcasts and has a lot of little audio snippets for like intro music and sound effects if you care to use those, but that's one. On the Windows side, there's a product called Audacity, which most people would say is kind of the standard recording and audio editing tool that folks use, and that is one that folks have.
What's the name of that again?
Audacity, and I believe it's open source. I don't think there may be a license
It's open
for that. What's that?
source. It's open.
It is open source. Yeah. And then the last thing I kind of point out is a decent location. Recording audio, I have found, is all of a sudden it's a very different experience. because you have to think about things like echoes and how, engaging with someone else in that. And so
Whether or not the dog's in the house.
that's right, yeah, or
If it's garbage day.
exactly, the garbage truck, the tree trimming crew next door, all these things essentially can kind of pollute your audio recording. I found some people who suggest if you're doing a recording by yourself, right, rather than like with a guest or doing an interview with someone or something like that, to actually like go into a closet where it's a very contained space. There's lots of soft surfaces to kind of reduce echo, and you'll get a good kind of clean recording out of that. I did a radio interview one time, and the only room I could sort of hide away in my house, because it was a Saturday morning and my kids were up, was a bathroom, right? Lots of hard edges, it was a vaulted ceiling, lots of echo, and you could definitely tell in the recording quality, just the physical space has an impact on that. So finding a good location is key. So I will say, if you're, writing blog articles is a time commitment in and of itself. Recording podcasts is that plus. I mean, because now there's a whole different sort of element of editing to it. I find that it's particularly if you're trying to do interview style, where you want to talk with someone else about the topic. There are lots of tools, for example, for like recording Skype conversations, where you can get good recordings on both sides and then edit them together so you have good continuity across that. So I will say there is a little bit more of a time commitment to producing this content, but again, once you've produced it, it's another layer on that sort of gravitational mass, and it's very portable. You can get it distributed in a lot of ways. The only other thing I would suggest on podcasting is suggestion of finding a partner. So there's something about having somebody else to talk to in the midst of discussing a topic, versus sort of feeling like I'm sitting in a room talking to myself about it. Having that interaction, I think, carries a lot in the recording itself. So the sort of extension from podcasting then that is coming along quite a bit is screencasting. And so this is kind of where, in a more formal sense, the plural sites of the world have kind of captured a commercial market share. But again, as an individual, if I have a particular how-to article I'm going to write, or a particular problem solution article I'm writing, being able to record an example demonstration of solving that goes a long way. Because now you can not just describe what you're doing and have static images, but you have a real interactive, where someone can pause and rewind and kind of go back and relive the process that you went through. Camtasia is kind of probably the de facto standard for screen recording. This is about a $300 product. There are others that you can choose from, but this tool is very full-featured. It has all the video editing. It allows you to do the kind of post-production. So you've seen where you get the zoom in and zoom out. You can overlay with highlighting or titles or things like that. So in my opinion, it's worth the investment. If you can get your employer to pay for it, or have some other benefactor cover that, by all means. One thing I'll say about screencasting is really scripting out the kind of problem and solution you're trying to do. I find myself very frustrated when I try to improvise while I'm recording, because inevitably things go wrong and I'm backing up, and some of that can be edited out after the fact. But if I sit down and really write through literally what I want to say, how I want to describe the problem, and how I want to describe the solution, and have that kind of script, then the recording process can go much smoother. And then also generally kind of a 10-minute limit, as far as attention span for someone who's wanting to see a solution. 10 minutes I think is pretty reasonable. And the last thing I would say is that if you're able to, record at a 1080 or 1280 by 720 resolution. This will, you know, output as an HD file, and particularly for if you're capturing like a visual studio, you want it so that if somebody views that full screen, that it's not going to distort out what you're trying to show. So getting a good high resolution or an HD standard resolution will help that recording come out better the other side. Has anybody done any screencasting, produced some of that content? It's a lot of fun when you get into it, but you know, each one of these is slightly more effort to put it together. Go ahead.
So just to clarify, higher resolution is still better, but that's the minimum.
Yeah, so you really want the proportions to be right. So yeah, this is from a recording standpoint, then it can scale up or scale down without losing any clarity in the recording, is what you really want to try to avoid.
Okay, so you would actually recommend that as the resolution, so that people that have low resolutions won't like have it shrunken?
Correct. Yeah. Now, one of the things, again, we're you know, we create all this content and we're trying to kind of create this gravity and this mass that's bringing into it. So, you know, if you do this is where it kind of compounds against on top of itself. So, I've recorded this screencast that's then uploaded to YouTube or Vimeo, which gives me a visibility in that environment. But then I'm also embedding that video into my blog, and I'm really leveraging all these different formats together, so that, again, it kind of compounds and has lots of linkages between those different types of content and formats of content.
Would you put it on both?
I would,
Vimeo
absolutely.
and YouTube?
You could, yeah. You know, again, the caution is that, and with video it's a little less, but again, it's just how frequently do you want to duplicate that same content out there? But yeah, I mean, those are probably the two.
The aspect you're thinking there is SEO?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so if the same content is found multiple times, then that, you know, will affect the search results and things like that. So the last area then is, as we're here today, is presentations, and so this is really a way for you to, again, have a real live audience, have real interaction with folks. Typically, the process is going to start with a pitch. So, you know, for Code Camp as an example, at whatever point they said, okay, speaker submissions are open, right? So having and crafting a pitch for a topic, a title, a short description of what you're going to describe, cover, and submitting that in is kind of the first step. You know, you've probably heard some form of this adage before, that if you want to master something, teach it to somebody else. And this is an area where, particularly if there's a technology that you want to kind of break into, you don't have that opportunity in the context of your day job, writing a presentation about it and with the intention to teach somebody else about it is a great way to immerse yourself into that and really get familiar with it. You know, I say, fear be damned. I mean, everybody has anxiety. I've found that the truth is that the people sitting in the chair are the same, very much like me, right? They deal with the same challenges I have. They have the same questions I have. I think as technical people, we believe that the audience, because they're so savvy, they're just, it has this intimidation factor. And my experience, at least, is that that's not there. People are very eager to learn. People are very eager to contribute. They're not going to be critical of what you have to say. And many times, if you have a gap and you say, well, I don't know exactly about this question, someone in the audience may, and they can contribute to that as well. So it is. It's hard to break into it, but once you're there, I think there's a comfort that comes, and I certainly would encourage, you know, Code Camp, the user groups, there's lots of opportunities for speaking engagements. Again, once you've done your engagement, then again, you have another media. So those slides that you've created, can be posted to SlideShare. I tend to try to record all of my presentations, so then that goes to YouTube. And again, everything gets then posted on the blog as another form of content on the blog. So 2 items that you could follow. These are 2 Twitter accounts. One is called Call to Speakers, and one is called SpeakNet. And they both will publish out and tweet when conferences are going on, when they've opened their speaker submission periods and things like that. So these 2 are a great way to kind of see what else is out there and find opportunities to present. So the summary slide here is, where'd it go? Here we go. So six things, right? Your avatar, your bio, a blog, podcasting, screencasting, presenting. I have found, having participated in all 6 of those, that something really kind of exciting happens. I was looking at Google Analytics one day for my blog, and I don't care how many views I have. What I care is the refer, like where did they come from to come to me? And I had this certain satisfaction when I found social.msdn.com, where somebody who knows who it was had used my article in a response to a problem on that forum, and that pointed back to my blog. There was something very gratifying about that experience of saying, okay, like somebody else is reading this, and they liked what I said, and they're willing then to share it with someone else in that context. So let me wrap up. So again, create, promote, remind, and I think if you are able to sort of develop these habits, then you'll find that then the content again will kind of draw gravity to you. Because the reality is, if I'm hiring someone and I get a resume, what's the very first thing I'm probably going to do? I'm going to Google that person's name. I want to see what they're about. I want to see if they have any contribution to the community. And all of this content is really serving to be the answer to that question. Thanks. We'll take your question here.
So how would you put in things like posts to Stack Exchange, tweets, and stuff like that? Are those additive, or are those time that you could have been spent on your own brand, in your opinion?
Yeah. So the question is like in regards to tweets that you put out or contribution to like a Stack Exchange or other forums. So again, the thing that I do is that on your blog sidebar, right, you can have a little presentation of your Stack Exchange badge, which shows your reputation number, right? So that allows, again, that's a quick way to tie those 2 environments together. And then likewise, having a little widget that shows your Twitter feed on your blog homepage, again, kind of ties those environments together. So I wouldn't necessarily, create blog articles about every tweet you put out, unless the content of that article tracks a conversation maybe, and you'd have several interactions on Twitter that could make up the body of that blog post. Question here.
Can I make a quick announcement?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm actually sort of coming at this from the other side because my company's hiring right now. So if you're working with a recruiter, or if you're not, you want to grab my card before you go. I can give it to you.
Let's go. So here's all my contact information, and like I said, I have recorded this session, so I'll have another blog post here, probably by next week, with this recording and these slides available for folks to check out. So I know we're running up on time, but I appreciate everyone coming this morning. Hope everyone has a great day.
You've got till 11.
Do I?
Yeah, 11:15.
Where's my buffer? Oh, great. We got time for questions. So.
I think one of the things that you asked over there, it probably has, the question really is about, should I even, so if I'm making a choice, should I spend my time here or there?
Sure.
Right? So should I spend more time creating my content on the blog, or should I spend more time on Stack Overflow?
Right.
So
Right.
for someone who wants to balance or make a choice, because obviously, you know, I have a limited amount of time.
Yep.
And if I have a badge on Stack, it's saying the Stack Overflow that's like 10, I
Right.
don't really want to show
Right,
it.
right, yeah, what's the balance there? Yeah, again, I think there's a couple of facets to that. One is again, kind of ownership of that content, right? You could be very active on Stack Overflow, and it's typically embedded down in those threads. And while it does link to you, you sort of don't own that content, right? So, so that's one, you know, consideration to make, is that if I, you know, do I have retention of that content overall? And one way that could, you know, if you find yourself on Stack Overflow commenting or contributing to a solution, right? Why not write your own blog post to say, hey, I saw this question on Stack Overflow. Here's how I've gone through this process before. Here was my response, but let me expand on that even more. That could become a blog post in your own environment that could build upon that particular thread. So again, I think you're right. I mean, the time commitment, if you're spending all your time just sort of polling Stack Overflow, so like where can I contribute, is that as valuable as spending time researching or preparing an article? Yeah, I mean, it's an hour spent somewhere. I don't think they necessarily are a one-to-one trade-off. Both of them are going to help establish your brand.
Right. I think I've talked to some people who want to take that approach, that I want to focus on Stack Overflow. So they actually spend time there looking for questions to answers to get their Stack Overflow ranking up.
Yep.
So there are certain kind of employers who are looking for a better Stack Overflow ranking. So
Right.
that's, in their mind, is a better gauge of how
Sure.
you know, competent you are.
Yeah.
And then there are other kind of employers, or other kind of people who would want to see more of a blog type promotion
Right.
personality.
Right.
I
Yeah.
think, so it's two different things, I think. So
Yeah.
usually what I end up seeing is like on the Stack Overflow, if I respond to something, which I rarely do, but if I do, I kind of already know about what the answer is. I don't look for questions that I can answer and I can find solutions for.
Yeah.
So I don't usually do that. I don't have time to do that.
Yeah.
I usually have an answer and I just post it there.
Yeah.
And usually not very long.
Yeah.
So
And I
that's-
think it's a good point. And I'm trying to remember if it's explicit in Stack Overflow where you sort of, if you're going to put a link in a answer, you know, you can sort of link to somebody else's, but they don't want a lot of self-promotion, basically,
yeah,
right?
Very, very.
And so, you know, like I have blog articles that have been posted to Stack Overflow as by somebody else as an answer. So that's great, right? But again, you don't, you know, they kind of crack down on some of that self-promotion, like, well, here, I already solved this problem. Here's the link to it. So again, there's a little bit of a balance there. But I think reflecting on that whole thread would be a way to capture that in your blog just the same. So,
And I've seen also that if you post same link to more than like 2 questions,
Right.
they immediately,
Yeah,
they
they'll-
monitor it very, very
yeah,
closely.
yeah, yeah. So.
One thing also, so sorry.
No, you're fine.
One thing I've noticed personally is when I try to do, when I'm posting, for example, or writing a blog post or something, is that if I'm able to finish it quickly, then I'm able to finish it.
Right.
I have at least a dozen of these things half done with some screenshots, if I'm not able to like finish it within like a week or 2 weekends,
Yeah.
if it goes past that, it's not gonna get
It'll
done. I
sit.
move on to something else.
Yeah.
So it just,
I found that to be
finding time
true,
is very
yeah.
hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In
Go
terms
ahead.
of like the frequency of keeping it updated, it seems to me that some people have a style where they'll like just make an observation on something current, and it's more of like a stream than it is.
Right.
I don't know how that relates to technical writing per se,
Yeah.
or your brain, but people like China Hoover come to mind who just, they're constantly making observations on current industry trends,
Yeah,
whatever
yeah.
else.
If you've ever read, you guys know who Seth Godin is, right? He's kind of a marketing guy. So he's extremely committed to blog every day, but he might only write one paragraph, but it's some generally brilliant thought, all right? But he's got this. For him, it's frequency. Like, I'm committed to do this every day to just get something out there. I would say, again, there are some, if you think about it, I don't know all the ins and outs of the search engine behaviors, but again, does a 500-word article weigh differently than a 50-word stream of consciousness kind of, I'm just putting something out there. That's fairly easy to measure, right? But yeah, I mean, I think and again, there are things with WordPress. I've seen a plugin that actually sits on your browser toolbar. So like if you're looking at something and you want to essentially capture the page you're looking at and post about it, like it'll take that URL and feed it into a new post in WordPress so that then you could turn that around really quickly. So those are some ways that if you do want to just capture it in the moment, I like this, don't like it, or those sorts of things, there are some tools to facilitate that as well. So. Go ahead.
As far as your brand goes, when you're posting about something, are you careful to make sure nobody else has posted something similar, or it's not like a copy, or does that matter, or is it just like, oh, I discovered this, I just learned it, I'm going to post about it because other people might be interested, but I'm not going to go try to find out. So that's one of the things I have is I'll figure something out and I'll be like, oh, I want to post about this, and I go, oh, there's 7 or 8 other posts, and I want to be more unique.
Yeah, so the question of like, if somebody's already written about a topic, should I also do my version of that topic? I would say absolutely. I find that same challenge because, and typically what I will do in many cases is reference back to those other versions of it, right?
Okay.
Like I read this person's article and tried what they said and it didn't quite work for me. Here's what did.
Okay.
So you tie it together, and that I think is a way to again kind of create some credibility. Like we're both trying to solve the same problem, and this approach worked for them, and this approach worked for me. But there's a linkage there.
Or maybe they left out a step or something like that.
Yeah.
You can fill it.
I would say exactly. I wouldn't say be critical. Like you don't want to say, well, this fool over here, that didn't work. Let me tell you how to really do it. So give, be tactful about it. But again, I think that it's very easy to find things to inhibit us from creating, right? Oh, I've got nothing new to say. And the reality is that the internet's a big place, right? There's lots of space for everybody to write. So, yeah, it's a good question. Go ahead.
You touched on this one. One of the big, turnouts for me, looking up a code snippet or an example of how to do something is the organization of how it's presented, and if it's understandable, if it's clear, and if there's a lot of ads or other stuff going on, or the code block is maybe not quality. I mean, just small things like that help it more organized and readable and understandable.
Yeah.
That you can kind of maybe span over.
Like a lot of people will make a decision within like 3 seconds whether they're going to engage that page.
Whether
or
it
not.
matches or not.
Exactly, and some disorganized content or something just all runs together. To me, I want to. It might be a great example. It might be very educational, but I probably wouldn't read it.
Yeah. So you mentioned kind of banner ads or things like that. I mean, I think most people who are making money by blogging, I mean, they're operating at a very different level, and the way they write and the priorities that they have are different. I think for the rest of us, you're right. Focus on the content. Don't worry about cluttering up your presentation with a lot of other things. And again, with WordPress, it's easy to kind of fall in that pit because there's lots of plugins and it's easy to wire these things together. So yeah, I mean, if you're writing for yourself, write the way that you want to read other people's writing, and make sure that it's formed that way as well. And that's why I point out those particular plugins are ones that help facilitate that as well.
So Derek, I had more of a personal question. I wanted to follow you, but I saw that your tweets were protected. Is there a reason why you don't tweet publicly?
No. It's me not paying close enough attention to what Twitter is doing. So, yeah, I'll look into that. So, great. Well, thanks for coming out, everyone.
Thank you.